is a cult? According to study.com, the word cult is defined as a system or group of people who practice excessive devotion to a figure, object, or belief system, typically following a charismatic leader. Some of the defining characteristics of a cult can include unquestioning devotion to the leader, isolation of members, the idea that the leader is the only source of truth and anyone else who says otherwise is a liar, abuse of members, persecution and public smearing of those who would choose to leave, dangerous behaviours, and financial secrecy, among various others. People who are in a cult generally don't understand that they are in a cult. The social media campaign for Luke Mitchell, convicted in 2004 of killing his girlfriend in 2003, is based on the belief that he is the victim of a miscarriage of justice. But is his campaign also a cult? Let's have a look at the evidence. Some of the information in this video comes from personal experience and observation. Other examples come from campaign discussion online. As always, you are free to come to your own conclusions. Number 1. No tolerance for dissent. The group does not tolerate questions or critical thinking and may discourage or punish those who express different opinions. When people asked questions about Luke's case which did not align with the narrative being presented by Sandrine and her campaign leaders, it was common for them to be banned from the main social media groups or blocked. Subsequently, when questions arose in relation to the newly available transcripts, the groups quickly shut this down and furthermore berated, named and shamed people who called attention to discrepancies between campaign narrative and statements within the transcripts from the court. It was common to see people saying that they had been blocked from the groups or treated badly simply for asking questions. Rather than responding to the points being raised or the discrepancies themselves, campaigners took to accusing anyone who dared to ask questions of being trolls and of creating a smear campaign, with a heavy emphasis on protecting the person who had done so much for the campaign and who they believed was under attack, Sandrine. So who is Sandrine? Sandrine is the author of a book called Innocents Betrayed, released in 2018, which she claims was based on information from the case files. She lived in the area at the time of the murder in 2003, and after becoming interested in Luke's case, she completed a PhD in philosophy, and upon gaining access to the case files, she believed she had discovered flaws in his conviction and in the police investigation. After releasing the book, she featured in a 2021 Channel 5 documentary called Murder in a Small Town, which pretty much blew up. All of a sudden, an influx of concerned and understandably curious individuals wanted to know more about the case, and the social media groups quickly gained new members. The problem is, this newfound information which pointed to others being the perpetrator of the heinous murder of 14-year-old Jodie Jones came primarily from one source, case files that only she had access to. And we had to take her word for it. This charismatic and well-intentioned doctor would never lie. She was to be fully trusted and was of course telling the truth. The problem is, evidence would later transpire to prove that she wasn't telling the truth. And anyone who tried to question this or challenge the narrative being told by the campaign would very quickly be met with a barrage of accusations and insults from supporters who did believe her. Number 2. Dishonesty. Cult leaders may not be accountable and may lie. Sandra seemed more than happy and willing to answer questions from people who didn't know much about the case and who simply wanted to know the facts. This is exemplified in the number of podcasts and interviews that she gave online. But she didn't seem willing to respond to questions about discrepancies between her claims and apparent fact. One example is that she vehemently told supporters that transcripts from the trial were not available to the public. She even went as far as reading a 1993 order to back this up, completely ignoring a 1995 Act which stated they were public information. When the transcripts were released, she did not respond to any of the resultant differences between what she had claimed and what the transcripts actually said. For example, things that she said witnesses said at the trial that we now know they didn't say. Things she said people said in statements, even though these statements were read out in the court and we can now see from transcripts that they didn't say those things. Claims she made about police deleting Luke's phone data, when he admitted to doing this himself in his own statements. Claims she made about Luke having no intention to meet his other girlfriend and that he did not even have another girlfriend, when his own mum stated at trial he was due to visit her for about a week, 5 days after Jodie's murder. Mistakes she made regarding when Luke left the house, and the subsequent accusation that Jodie's family left their house early, implying guilty knowledge on their behalf, even though there's evidence to challenge that. She responded to none of it. She was asked about the transcripts in an interview, but instead of addressing the individual points, she had this to say.
Said in the book, the transcripts proved that the book was dishonest. Mm-hmm. Well, Innocence Betrayed, in the opening chapter, says, I'm going to tell you the story of all the information that was never before a jury, that was never in the public domain. Mm-hmm. Well, that means that what was in court was before the jury, wasn't it?
Aye.
And what I'm saying is, and what I said in the book, what I said in the introduction is, what was said in court was not the truth. A lot of the witnesses did not tell the truth. So I've now lied about how difficult it is to get transcripts. Those transcripts now prove that I've lied in the book as well. Nobody's actually pointed out where these lies are or what these lies are, because they can't.
So according to Sandra Lean, lies cannot be pointed out. Interesting. The differences being pointed out related to claims she had made about what witnesses said at trial and absolute evidence that they did not say those things. They also related to claims she made about statements that were read out at the trial. Instead of simply choosing to elaborate on these differences to offer an explanation to any supporters who may have had questions about them, she chose to ignore it all and instead come back to the old, I know what I'm talking about, you don't, and you can't prove me wrong. Many of her supporters were happy to accept this, and the continuation of the smearing of anyone who would dare challenge Sandra Lean continued, including ludicrous accusations that the transcripts had been altered. Despite the assertion that the campaign was built on a quest for truth, anyone who asked questions or highlighted concerns that didn't tie in with the narrative of the campaign was labelled a troll. Then there were the freedom of information responses, some which challenged Sandra's claims about untested DNA, and claims made by another supporter who she worked closely with regarding a knife found in a skip and a knife in the productions with blood on it. Questions were just not welcome, and some who would present evidence which contradicted that of the campaign narrative were even threatened. It's almost as if anything was acceptable for the greater good. We'll come back to that point. Some of these points tie in with other cult aspects, such as the leader is the only source of truth, everyone else is lying, the leader is always right, criticism of the leader or questioning is considered persecution. Number 3. Financial secrecy. The group does not provide meaningful financial disclosure. A 2014 article in the Financial Times by entrepreneur Luke Johnson stated, "Cults become a perversion of commerce. Rather than sell products that people choose to buy, it can be easier to bamboozle the vulnerable." I'm not suggesting that the sole intention of the Luke Mitchell campaign was to make money. I don't believe that to be the case, but there does seem to be evidence of not only financial secrecy and lack of accountability in that area, but of questions even from members themselves about where their money has gone and for what purpose. Since the 2021 documentary Murder in a Small Town, there have been various fundraisers attached to the campaign, including money raised for Luke's mum, which then had to be refunded after hints that the money would go to Luke. There are rules on raising money for a convicted individual. And a Buy Me a Coffee fund set up by Sandra Lean meant that members could send her money online. Her PayPal address was attached to the groups and on her YouTube for people to send money through that. One of the main reasons she said funds were needed was for the testing of samples. Samples that she claimed were previously untested or that needed to be retested. To this day, there has still been no update on these samples, despite money being raised, and furthermore, her claim that some of these samples included semen, which had only partially been tested, meaning they had been identified in a lab as semen but not tested for DNA, was discredited by a Freedom of Information response from the Scottish Police Authority, who explained that any semen samples identified as semen would also have been tested for DNA in Jodie Jones's case. Sandra did not acknowledge this response. A birthday party fundraiser for Sandra, in the town where Jodie once lived and where her family still did, was deemed inappropriate by some, and the party was subsequently cancelled by the venue. At one point, Sandra had claimed that this fundraiser was simply donations in celebration of her birthday, but after the cancellation, she claimed that the people responsible had pretty much robbed Jodie's family of the chance of justice. Some supporters expressed their disgust online about the fact that the birthday bash of an old lady who had given so much to the case had been cancelled. On a video on her own YouTube channel last year, Sandra explained to her supporters why funding was necessary.
Next up are a number of comments about the testing of the samples. For obvious reasons, I can't say which samples we're pursuing and why, but I do want to address some of the things that have been said. So the first is the claim that legal aid will pay for testing. Yeah, it might, maybe even probably will. But why would we trust them? If we go the legal aid route, they will have control over the labs we use. They will have control over the type of testing, all on the basis of cost. Or you can't do that type of testing, it's too expensive. Or you can't use that lab, it's too expensive. Okay, now why would we trust that? Given how dirty we've seen they're prepared to play, why would we do that? We want entirely independent, transparent testing. And the only way we're going to get that is if we raise the money to pay for it independently. And that's why some people have been talking recently about the potential need for fundraising once we get the stuff with samples sorted out. So yeah, we've got no confidence left in the system. So that's why we're not minded to go the legal aid route. It's not that we wouldn't get funding for it. We wouldn't get enough funding, and we wouldn't have the freedom to do the testing the way we want to do it.
According to psychologytoday.com, persecution paranoia can be included in signs of a cult. The idea of an enemy and a growing paranoia about external forces. I'm not suggesting that doubt isn't valid or even understandable in a case where there's an alleged miscarriage of justice, or concerns about a system. But it is interesting that here Sandra is explaining that legal aid would be available, but it's not enough. She explained in another video that Luke's defence had been given an opportunity to test the productions in an SPA lab under police supervision. But this was not good enough. Again, there has been no update on these samples or whether they ever will be tested, or whether they even really exist. Supporters eventually came to blows over who had the money and what it was to be used for. It was claimed that an independent treasurer was responsible for the money after November 2023, and prior to this, that Sandra Lean had the money. Other supporters who had been involved in fundraising appeared to claim that this wasn't the case. There doesn't seem to be any number given for funds raised before November 2023. After the release of Innocents Betrayed in 2018, Sandra said that profits from the book would be donated to help fund a new organisation called Long Road to Justice. She said it would take a radically new approach to helping the fight against injustice. The problem is that it's difficult to find any information about this organisation online. Indeed, some allege that it never existed. If it did, it's difficult to find information regarding why it disappeared and what happened to the funds raised for that. Number 4. For the greater good of the cult. If the end justifies the means. Cults often accept the idea that any behaviour is permissible, so long as it's for the good of the cult, or will have a perceived positive outcome for the cult's aims. It seems particularly evident in Luke's campaign that people are willing to turn a blind eye to behaviour that they would otherwise class as unacceptable, and that they have said was unacceptable when it happened to Luke Mitchell. For example, the naming of and accusations against individuals mentioned in Sandra Lean's book is perfectly acceptable to people who have voiced their outrage at Luke Mitchell being named in the press before he was convicted. People that were questioned as part of the investigation and people who were not, but who Sandra believes should have been, are named in the book and online, where accusations have run wild. There have even been incidents where campaign supporters have posted photos of people not connected to the campaign online with accompanying text alleging that they were someone close to the investigation, when they were not. Crime scene photos and medical records have been released online, which, despite being illegal, is clearly seen as for the greater good. A significant part of the campaign has focused on the implied guilty knowledge of Jodie's family. For example, Sandra claims in her book that Jodie's grandmother, sister and sister's boyfriend left the house before they even should have known that she was missing. The timings provided in her book have been discredited not only by statements and transcripts, but by Luke's own mother, who provided different information during a James English interview regarding when Luke left the house to what Sandra asserts in her book. Again, she hasn't addressed this. Some supporters regularly attack Jodie's family online, saying things like, "Her gran should burn in hell." I won't post those screenshots here. So wouldn't supporters want to weed out the facts from the non-facts? Wouldn't a group who focuses on truth and finding the truth and who cares about the truth want to know what the truth actually is? Often there is no response to highlighted discrepancies in the form of critical discussion, but rather the response comes in the form of personal attack or the accusation that the poster must not really care about Luke's case. Despite the growing list of obvious lies that have been told, many supporters remain loyal. Number 4, for the greater good, ties into number 5, abuse of members. According to Dr. Daniel Amen of amenclinics.com, abuse is common in cults. Followers may experience various forms of abuse and may face threats of physical harm, shunning, and other forms of punishment. It's not just former members who had decided to step away from the group who experienced abuse or had a difficult time. Members who still remain dedicated to Sandra Lean also appear to have felt the sting of the experience. Recently, things have taken a turn and the fabric of the campaign seems to be falling apart. We'll look at that in the next section. Group members talk of being blocked, of others being controlling, of secrets, and of members suffering bad health as a result of their involvement. Ex-admins and moderators of the groups have spoken out to share their experience and the negative impact that being part of the group had on their life and their mental health. Some of the abuse has included threats, doxing, and the mocking of disabled group members. Number 6. The final conflict. PsychologyToday.com describes the last stage before a cult's collapse as the final conflict of the cult. According to psychologist Stephen Mather, cults always end, some sooner, others later, but all suffer inevitable decline in many ways as a result of their management and leadership practices. But not all cults will end in the same way. Recently, Sandra Lean was asked to leave the campaign and the case by Luke Mitchell himself. One of the admins from one of the main groups posted this. After concerns for a long time, in July this year, and not hearing from Sandra after she told Luke's friends she was out, Luke made the final decision to send a signed and dated mandate withdrawing all authorisation and permissions for Sandra Lean to work with or access materials pertaining to his case, also withdrawing permissions to speak and act on his behalf. This announcement was also made. For some, this may come as a shock, for others perhaps not, but please remember Luke Mitchell and Jodie Jones are the priority and this isn't a popularity contest between his support. No one person is more important than Luke. Sandra has been one of the few people standing by truth and justice when no one else could for years, but she is no longer part of the legal battle through Luke's and his legal representation's choice. Another supporter posted online information which appeared to have been passed to him from admins of the group. He said, Sandra Lean was provided with an official mandate following her behaviour that all permissions have been withdrawn from Mr. Mitchell. This included ample warning for the collection of all items pertaining to his case, as she has no legal rights to them. The claim was also made that the case files which had been in Sandralene's possession were irreversibly damaged. Admin would also claim on the main group that the case files were mouldy. It was also alleged that Luke had been provided with false promises about his release, as well as that Sandra had essentially not moved the case forward. Sandra responded to this with a YouTube update, denying that there had been any issues between herself and Luke until he had made this decision out of the blue. There were other issues covered in her video, but the focus was on how terrible the people who had done this to her are. How did supporters react? Despite not having heard anyone else's side of the story, or indeed Luke Mitchell's, who isn't even able to respond because, well, he's in prison, supporters offered an outpouring of sympathy for Sandralene, with many saying they would no longer have anything to do with the campaign, despite still believing that Luke is innocent. Phrases such as, "I stand with Sandralene and there's no going forward now, and none of us know nothing now, the campaign is over," as well as, "I still believe he's innocent, but I could care less about him." So without really knowing what happened, why Luke made the decision, and without having any real understanding of what may have gone on behind the scenes, a phrase that Sandralene regularly used, supporters were willing to offer their unquestioning and unwavering trust to the one person they had always relied on, to provide them with the truth. Supporters seemed to turn on each other, blaming the individuals who were allegedly now working with Luke to get the case files back. Although one consequence seems to be that one or two have now said they question Luke's innocence, some who still believe he's innocent are willing to abandon any involvement in the fight against what they once perceived as an outrageous injustice. They believe a man has spent 20 years in prison for a crime someone else committed, but are willing to completely walk away from this in disgust because he had withdrawn permission, a decision apparently made with his legal representation, from one person who is not a legal professional to work on his case. Was this campaign ever about injustice? Or was it about the person telling the story? Despite there being other sources of information on Luke's case, court appeals, press articles, and transcripts with statements, those were seen as unreliable as they came from the very sources which ruined the life of a 14-year-old boy and prevented justice being done for a 14-year-old girl. Only one woman with a box of papers that they would never get to see was the source to be trusted, at all costs, and even with information to the contrary. And it seems as if this one woman has become far more important to her loyal supporters than the alleged victim himself, Luke Mitchell. There's a lot more that I could have added to this video, but I didn't want to make it too long. To finish, here are some other known signs of a cult. Again, this video is based on my observations and belief that the Luke Mitchell campaign was a cult. Feel free to make up your own mind.
Beats.